First, I appreciate the spirit of the question because living with a spouse with Asperger's can be a very lonely and difficult journey. And so I appreciate the spirit of the question, which is how do I move toward my husband who's struggling in this way? And maybe before I move into that in more depth, it would be wise to say just a couple things about Asperger syndrome. Asperger's syndrome, Asperger's disorder, those are same terms basically, and it's a condition, it's a diagnosis on the autism spectrum, if you will, at the higher end, higher functioning end of the spectrum. Basically, Asperger's has a number of features. One, and probably the most prominent one, is that a person has difficulty in their relationships, difficulty with social interactions. And that's due to a number of things. They find it very difficult to put themselves in another person's shoes, to understand another person's desires, thoughts, emotions. And so there is this often disconnect with people. They find it hard to communicate non-verbally. They find non-verbals hard to pick up and understand, something that someone who's what is called neurotypical has. That's just inherent to the way we've learned to interact with people over time. So they have difficulty reading cues, social cues, nonverbals, and they can also have, although their language development is excellent, sometimes the way they speak is a bit off as well. And so these language and issues, nonverbals, inability to easily step into another person's shoes and experience what they're experiencing, empathizing with them, make social interactions very, very challenging. They also may have focal interests, special interests, where they can become almost obsessive about that particular interest, and those tend to be more prominent in childhood, and actually can be harnessed in a good way in adults. So someone who had, say, a particular interest in computers or computer programming might well become a phenomenal computer programmer as an adult. So they can be harnessed into a vocation, But again, that focal interest can also be problematic in relationships as well. So that is some of the things that this woman who wrote in is likely to be experiencing. She's likely to be experiencing a lack of emotional reciprocity, a lack perhaps of physical intimacy and reciprocity. And so it's often a very lonely place for the spouse of an Asperger's sufferer. So how can she love her husband? I think one of the most important things is, does her husband understand this diagnosis? I mean, is it something that they both have, in a sense, accepted as this is part of life, this is part of how he's created, and rather than denying that, are both of them, in that sense, accepting of this diagnosis, accepting of the fact that this is a really good description of how this man struggles? If that's true, that's a great start, because at that point you're saying, okay, we have to do life perhaps in a different way. If I'm expecting normality like I expect with a person who's not struggling with Asperger's, I'm bound to be, my expectations are bound to be off. So I think that's the first thing I would want to know about this couple. How does the husband How's the husband dealing with this diagnosis? Does he have an attitude of, I want to grow in the way I relate to my wife. I know I have difficulties here. If that's the case with him, it makes her moving toward him much easier, because they're on the same page. They're working together toward a common goal. If he's not, if he's really resistant to the fact that he struggles in these particular ways, that's going to make it a lot harder for her. So again, I don't know the exact situation, but the more they are both on the same page and agreeing that yes, these are focal areas of weakness, then they can work together on it. A few specifics perhaps for her end. I mean, it does mean changing expectations about what emotional and perhaps physical intimacy looks like. She may well have to be very direct and very concrete in her conversations and communication with him, so that she's not relying on subtleties and nonverbals, and that I think will be helpful for him. That's one of the strengths, in a sense, of Asperger's, is people communicate very directly, very clearly. There are strengths and weaknesses to that, but that's also a strength, and perhaps is something that attracted her to him. In terms of Asperger men, particularly, tend to be direct. They tend to be have strong convictions, and particularly if indeed he is a Christian, those are very attractive things. But that process of communication, I think, needs to continue to be direct and not abstract.